Any copy of the agenda from?
Yeah, agenda minutes.
Okay, do we have a motion to call the meeting to order?
So moved.
Second? Second? Thank you. All in favor? Okay. Review and approval of minutes. Do we have any discussion on minutes last meeting?
I move for approval.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. First item on the agenda then really is tax abatement discussion. We had Jeremy had sent it on a note today. I think it was some good information, and Bernie provided a Chapter 100 revenue bond scenario or an example of what it would look like. Do you want to go ahead and run us through this, and then we can open it up for discussion?
Yeah, Jeremy's question is, I guess, wanted to see what the impact or what is the magnitude of tax abatement occurred. So what I did was basically look at $1 million real property investment. And so if you look at the top there, it assumes a real property tax rate of 6.51. That's just an example of a rate that might exist in Columbia. It's assessed at, for real property, 32%. And so the top there shows you the breakdown of $6.51 per hundred, who gets the tax revenue. You see that schools get $4.88 of the $6.51 per hundred. And it takes you down to the library, how much the city gets, the state of Missouri. And there's what they call a commercial surcharge, which is basically Missouri doesn't have an inventory tax. So this is pretty much a replacement for the inventory tax. And so on $1 million of real property investment without any tax abatement over a 10-year period would generate $208,000 in property taxes. So I'm down here now. So the second column would show if you did a 50% abatement for 10 years, obviously half of that, you're generating $104,000 for the taxing districts, $104,189. And so that other 50% is abated. Now the bottom shows you of that $104,000 where that money gets distributed to as far as the taxing entities. So that very bottom right column, state of Missouri gets the smallest portion. Columbia Public Schools would get $78,099 on down the line, and that shows you the distribution of where the funds goes, where the funds that are collected go to. Pat, did you have any questions? Or
no, I also brought something here that I'll hand out, and this breaks it down a little bit more to what I think we're talking about. I agree with what Bernie has there on Chapter 100. And I have broken it out this way for a reason. If you look at a current appraised value of a parcel here in Boone County, and this particular parcel would be in the zone, but that's not pertinent to this example. And I'm also listing the entities as Bernie did in Chapter 100, the rates. And if you'll see at the very top, it's got the current appraised and the current assessed. And for those of you that are familiar, commercial property is assessed at 32% of the appraised value. Okay? So extending that out, you can see that the tax amount would be $26,711.92. After the EEZ improvements, assuming a tax rate is the same, doesn't change, and a 50% abatement, and the current appraisal, because of the improvement, would bump up to $1,000,004. The current assessed would bump up to $448,000. Is everybody with me on that? Then the entities are the same, the rates are the same, you carry that on across. The amount that's abated is $1,230.47. Those are the numbers that you see in the negative there, in parentheses. And the tax to distribute to the entities would be $27,950. Okay. Now, I've also included, because this seems to always be left out when you're talking about impact on taxes, is those of you that are not aware, for the process of collecting taxes statutorily under the law, the collector withholds 1% for the collection process. The assessor is withhold 0.5% and 1/8% to a cap of $125,000. That's very convoluted, but I'm showing this so that you have an understanding that when you're talking about abating, you're also talking about some administrative costs that is eaten by the administration of the process. Does anybody have questions on that? Okay. So then, going on down to the third thing here, and this is what I have visited with you about and Mike about, is asking for a recommendation for a policy decision so that we know what we're really talking about when we're talking about an abatement at 50% or whatever percent we break out. If you go down to this third grouping, if we were to fix the amount that's abated just to that increased assessment improvement, then that's how your numbers would look. The taxing entities would continue to get a little, as the property value increases, as time goes on, everybody's property value has historically increased in Boone County, Columbia. So that natural reassessment that occurs, that piece of it then would continue to go to the taxing entities. The abatement would stay the same. See that number 123047 on this example. The taxing entities would not lose quite as much, and then the commission amounts at the bottom would stay the same because they're based on that entry level. I know this is a lot to absorb, and I didn't want to send it out to you because it would take me 4 pages to type what I just
So what
said.
you're saying, after the abatement is done, any increase in assessment, the taxes on that increase continues, goes
Go
to the taxing entities.
Rather than
And the abated portion is set, and that abatement portion stays the same for that 10-year period unless somebody decides to change.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we have any information on how much taxes generally go up per year or per reassessment, or do you kind of work with, how does property kind of generally go up?
It just depends, and that's a good question. We could pull that information together for you.
Just
I have
off your
done.
experience, have we say 2% every reassessment?
I would say 4%
Every reassessment
would
goes
be
up.
close. Yeah, it's not going to fluctuate
That's
that much.
annually that?
No, it's every 4 years.
4%
in
every
Boone
4
County, about. So then, what the policy recommendation that I'm asking to go along with this under discussion of the abatement, I have also tried to put this down in words. It's a draft, so. I'm trying to give you a little bit of background here, and then also the recommendation of the policy decision. Mike, let me get out of the chart, I'm sorry. So what I'm saying here is that based on Chapter 135, which does cover the laws of Missouri over EEZs, it talks about words like subsequent improvement. And if you just read down, you can read that, I'll let you read it, and then when we get to the proposed policy recommendation, I'm willing to discuss that with anybody. Sure.
Follow along with it.
Sure. As far as they go.
Just so everybody can follow the discussion. You may not have enough, but
I don't have
huddle up
enough,
and
but-
pass around so everybody can see the information.
Sure.
around.
Well, appreciate you really doing this work. It's great. It's great information.
And we certainly don't need to decide this tonight, but because we're talking about the abatement amount, I thought this was the appropriate time to demonstrate and bring this forward.
So I think we want to open it up to any other discussion as well on the abatement form. Excuse me.
Yeah, before we leave this topic, a concern I have is about the policy recommendation is the first concern is whether we can do it under the statute. And I'm not sure that we can, because my understanding, and again, I haven't looked at it lately or with this in mind, but my understanding is that we need 50%, you need to abate whatever the tax is at 50%. And so if the my fear is, or my concern is, that if the assessed value goes up, our abatement level might fall beneath 50% if we implemented this. And the state might be upset about that.
Before I even brought this forward,
Yeah.
of course, I did some homework on this.
Okay.
And there is no case law, nor is there a statutory definition of the term subsequent improvements.
Okay.
So I had the county council look at this. He thinks it's appropriate. Now, could it be challenged? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But does it kind of allay some concerns that people have expressed? Yes, because it's as harmless as you can hold the taxing entities that I can tell as possible that I can come up with. So, and I did discuss this with Mike and Brady this morning. Are you aware of any additional information other than what we talked about this morning?
No. And we generally agree with you that we would support this.
So there's no legal precedence yet, nobody's challenged.
That's correct.
this type of-
That's correct.
So
based on the
you
research that we've been able to find. Mm-hmm.
I mean, my impression is that a lot of the other EEZ advisory boards have not really tried to fine-tune the program in any way, other than to say it exists, we're going to do it. And I think that what we're trying to do is fine-tune it for our community in response to the concerns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Andrews, I have a question. It's a general question about the whole thing here, because we're kind of, my interpretation of the EEZ criteria is that these are minimums, like state minimums. Now, am I correct in saying that these are state minimums, but we can require more of ourselves? So, say for instance, and this example, do not have a heart attack when I say this. The minimum is 50% abatement. For some reason, what if we said 75%? Are we able to do that?
Increase the abatement in the term? Yes, absolutely.
As long as we meet the minimum standards of the program.
Correct. I thought you were going to go the other direction.
No, that's the minimum, that's the ceiling or the floor or whatever you're
That's
talking
the
about.
minimum. That's what we're proposing is the absolute most conservative minimum that's allowed.
Okay, so my next question goes to job creation. If the minimum is 2 jobs, can we as a board recommend a higher standard? Because you just said if we meet the minimums, then we can have a higher standard for our community. Would that be a safe to say?
From my discussions with DED, my understanding is no, because if the state minimum is to be eligible for the program is 2 jobs and 100,000, and the locals must offer tax abatement. So if someone comes in and creates 2 jobs and 100,000, and then comes to us for the back tax abatement, and we say no because we have higher minimums, that pretty much makes them ineligible for the program because the state's not going to do any benefits if the locals don't. So from where I look at all of the other EEZs out there, like I handed out Independence last week, I mean, it starts at 2 jobs, 100,000 investment, you're going to have to do the 50% for 10 years minimum. You can go up to, based on new jobs created, you can increase your abatement level in term, but from my discussions with DED, we can't have a higher standard because it creates that gap where, they need to match their benefits with the locals.
Okay, well, I'll use this example. Say I had a 17 on my ACT, and I meet the minimum requirements to get into college. But I want to go to MU where I may require 20 or 21. You see what I'm saying? I meet the minimum. I can go to college with 17. I may not be able to go to MU, but I qualify to be in college. You get where I'm at? So if our standards are higher, and that company says, well, we're not going to create 2 jobs. I mean, we require 4. Let's say we require 4, and you can't make 4 jobs. Then okay, then you just don't qualify for this EEZ in Columbia. I mean, I don't see a problem with our standards being a little higher in those instances. I mean, that that's how I'm interpreting it. And as long as we meet the minimums, we don't want to be a C average city. If we want to.
Well, I was trying to get at that kind of, I think, the same concept in my email this afternoon, where trying to explore what types of accountability and additional requirements we might be able to impose without offering additional abatement. And I don't know that we can, but I'd like to understand better whether we can, because as I understand it in this program, a business can participate in this program and be eligible for the state tax credits and not receive any local abatement.
Correct.
Because they invest in personal property and the requisite jobs.
Sure.
So the state's position is there has to be local abatement of a minimum of 50% within the zone.
So they have to have our buy-in. Our buy-in costs 4 jobs.
And this is what I don't know. I think it'd be worthwhile to understand better whether within the statutory framework we can say, yes, this is our EEZ, and you're welcome to cite your business here. And if you cite your business and invest $100,000 in 2 new jobs, and you're in an eligible code, you will be eligible for state tax credits. If you want also the property tax abatement that is available to you from a local perspective, you need to do what we set forth as the requirements for that. I haven't seen anyone else do it.
And is there legal precedence? If it's not, then that means, just like with this proposal we have on our desk right now, if there's no legal precedence, that means it should be a go.
Well, I Googled something on the internet and EEZs and doing some research, and something came up about the Republic of Missouri, and I think it goes along with what we're talking about as far as the state tax credit. You can earn that with a minimum of 2 full-time jobs and 100,000 investment, but to get the abatement, you have to have a minimum of 15 or more jobs to get the abatement and 35 hours per week. So I like that correlation.
I saw that too, and
Yeah.
that's actually when I called DED to ask about that question.
Uh-huh.
That actually came back from the old enterprise zone program and not the new enhanced enterprise zone program. So there are a lot of websites out there that are,
Not
I'm
correct.
told, that are out of date, or they're still maybe applying the old enterprise zone program and not the enhanced enterprise zone standards.
Mhm.
So, because that, I actually saw that same one.
Yeah.
That was the only example I could find where anyone had a minimum that they tried to have that was above the 2 jobs. But again, statutorily, if it's 2 jobs and 100,000, they have to submit the notice of intent. And if it is 2 jobs and 100,000, then the last page of that notice of intent is signed by the locals that say this company is eligible, NAICS, is in the zone, the proposed zone, and there's 100,000 that you approve that you're doing 50% for 10 years. So it kind of, I asked the same question, and I was told that that's not feasible to raise it.
I kind of would like to challenge that. Feasible in opinion, I mean, at this point, that needs to be legally challenged. I mean, if we look in the law books and somebody has challenged it legally and sued the city because they didn't get enterprise zone because they didn't meet a higher standard. But what I'm hearing is more of an opinion than someone saying the law, the statute, this state versus this municipality, this couldn't happen. You know what I mean? Feasible, and yeah, I think we need to look into that a little bit more. I think our standards can be higher, and if they can be higher in other places, why can't this be one that we can challenge as well?
I just want to be sure I'm understanding what you're saying. What I'm hearing you say is that the standards would be higher if we gave a higher percent of abatement?
No, I'm saying that the standards for Columbia be higher than the state to meet our EEZ qualifications. Okay, you meet, you know, just the example I said, hey, I can get in college with a C average and an 18 on 8. I can't get in the MU. You see what I'm saying? That doesn't stop me from going to college.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
I understand. I'm just not clear about the 75% abatement.
Was an example of being
withhold
higher.
more money from the taxing entities, and that's what you're saying.
Well,
right?
I'm just saying as an example, we're exceeding the minimum. The minimum is 50. We're doing better than 50. You know, if they wouldn't bark at us giving them the 75% abatement, they wouldn't bark at that. I don't see why they would bark if we made our standards higher for the amount of jobs created. You see what I'm saying? If they do, then there's a double standard. And if there's no precedence, then we need to challenge that. It's just, I mean, you can't be for this and not for this. If all of it is minimums and we can exceed the minimum requirements, which a lot of laws do, a lot of ordinances do that. I don't see why we couldn't create our own higher standards. If it's job creation, maybe we do give. I think just meeting our minimum standards is enough. You know, I think we may need to require more jobs. We may require something else. Just like we're exempting some of these businesses in our industry codes. We're fine tuning this to meet Boone County and Columbia, Missouri. So that's kind of where I'm confused. We need to see if we can. I think we need to challenge it. That's where I'm at.
Well, I think on this point, it would be useful to us to get advice from the city councilor, or the county councilor, or both, as to whether we could impose more requirements to obtain the minimum local abatement.
And I think that you three would be the best to figure out what you want to have, what should happen, and what change it needs to go up. My interpretation was it needed to go to city council, but if you talked to Mr. Andrews earlier, that may not need to happen. But some language in some way needs to be put in place for the what ifs, to cover our behind if these guys create 2 jobs and lose them in 3 months, but they're getting an abatement still. You see, we have to have something in place to protect your money. You guys are the ones that are losing the money. What do you think?
Okay, I see that as a separate thing from the abatement, and that is how the administration during the EEZ process, once it's approved and once a business has come about and employees are hired, some type of language, if I understand what you're saying, that would look at a what if they close the doors. Is that?
Yeah, a clawback.
Well, it's a good question from our standpoint because, you know, our concern is the biggest hit really is the, you know, the school system.
I put that in code, you can still read it.
Yeah, that's right. I see all those codes. But I see CPS, so I understand that portion of it. I get that portion of it. And I think I asked this question in one other meeting, you know, in terms of, you know, what does happen, you know, and what assurances and how do we get a report back in terms of the success of this, you know, are there jobs really being created, how many jobs and where these people are from, you know, is there a reporting mechanism?
Sure. We talked
understand what that
this morning with Pat. I mean, obviously there'll be a local application for abatement where they list what their real property expansions are going to be over the next years and all that, and then there would be incumbent upon the local administrator each year to get a report from them, report back to the advisory board that's required to be reported back to city council. So yes, and we would also propose, or we talked about.
And is that something that would automatically, you know, be made available to the school system, or do we need to dig for that information?
No, I think it's with one of the advisory board duties is, and whoever the local administrator is would prepare that report for the advisory board to be for distribution to all the taxing entities. Be required each year for them to continue to get their abatement. We also talked about applicants who do not fulfill the requirements will have their abatement canceled.
Right.
I mean, that, I think.
And you can cancel it throughout the year. If you cancel it, I mean, it can.
Throughout the year?
Well, I mean, I guess I didn't know exactly the tax time. I didn't know when the advisory will meet, or what I'm saying is, so.
Yeah, I guess it would be kind of how we want to set it
And
up.
who would be responsible for canceling that if the entity did not meet their obligations?
It would be, well, the advisory board would get the information, make a recommendation to the city and county, or the county to cancel the abatement. And it would be stated up front, anything they sign to get abatement in the first place that they're aware of, this is one of the requirements. You can put those in, that's more or less a policy issue. So I have a question here. You're talking about, you know, two things. 50% for 10 years is the minimum. Are proposing anything higher than that? And then there's the second, okay, and then the second question is, can we raise the minimum? I certainly do some more research on that, but is it, in what instances would anyone want to raise it above 50% for 10 years?
Certainly from, you know, my recommendation would be because, you know, that's a big hit on the school system, you know. And you know, you know, our issue, we got a brand new school that we're bringing online, and then elementary schools after that, and you know, we do, our 5-year projection shows that, you know, our reserves are going to be tight down the road.
Yeah.
You know, so that presents its own challenges because, you know, we're responsible for, you know, getting the revenue in. Mm-hmm. And the state has been very, very uncertain in terms of, you know, supporting school systems. We don't know what's going to happen there. So if this is successful, you know, then you know, we really would like to get a feel for, well, what kind of impact are we looking at here? You know, how bad of a hit could this be? Because
I agree with that, but I guess I'm a little, try not to say hit, try to look at it as 50% additional than what we have today. Now, the original committee talked about doing something for lead, another 10%, but I think I agree with you, 50%. And there is a question, the lead is more expensive up front, but hopefully over the life it would save. So let's just leave it at 50%. But again, I guess I always try to take the positive, if we can bring in a company, a brand new company that invests in the community, then that's gonna be 50% more money than the school district has today. And that's what I'm looking at, instead of the
And I think we cleared it up in terms of how that's applied, you know,
right.
that's applied to the, you know, one set of.
So I'm
set.
looking at it, hopefully it's positive for the
Yeah.
school system, because I'm a big supporter of the school system, believe me.
Well, and I mean, I think on that point, you get, say you have 50% more money than you would have had, assuming that the EEZ is the reason.
Right, and it's just one of the many tools.
Yeah,
It won't be, I don't
exactly,
think, the
you know,
single reason.
But assuming that it's a single reason, and you get 50% of the revenue that you would have, that 50% more than you would have had without it.
Right.
But you get 100% of the school children, of the employees that may, you know, say it attracts 50 new jobs. Well, 50 new jobs, if they have 3, 4, 5 kids in school, or even 2 kids in school, is a net increase in your load of the students that you're going to have to service. Because I see economic growth as also service.
Sure, and that's the other, that's kind of the infrastructure part.
And again,
this
this
is
is
a-
50%
Yeah,
of school.
and it's a, we understand that this is an issue that's impacting communities all over the country, you know. And you know, it's been positive for some communities and some communities, maybe not so, you know. And you know, the other question is that, you know, businesses that are already existing within, you know, within Columbia that's been here, and they're inside the EEZ, and they want to expand, which they would probably expand with or without the EEZ.
Right. Right.
Then all of a sudden,
I agree.
you know, we provided a vehicle where it's just a, you know,
Possibly-
it's just lost
possibly
revenue.
you do take it.
It's just lost of future revenue.
Right, right.
That becomes,
Right.
and if that offsets the number of companies that we're bringing in, the new companies that we're bringing in, then the net of that over the long haul is basically a reduction in tax revenue for the.
But I guess again, you know, I mean, again, we can debate
Those are-
118 different, you know, EE zones currently in the state of Missouri, and hopefully we have, the school systems haven't seen that. So that's, and unfortunately, it's just a competitive environment. I'd rather not do tax abatement at all, because of it. You know,
And the reason I have to ask this is that I've got to go back
Sure.
and talk to my board, you know,
Right.
I'm really representing the board, and the board really kind of speaks its mind in terms of, you know, what
And those
its
are good
thoughts
questions. I
are
think we need to have
on this,
those
and all of
discussions.
these questions will, you know, will come up.
And
We had the same discussion when we did the TIP, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll want to discuss all the different, you know, possibilities, and whether this winds up being a really good thing for you know, public schools or.
Well, I will mention in terms of existing employers, I mean, we have existing employers like 3M and a number of others that are branch plants. They do compete against there are other company locations in other states. And they've asked for incentives in the past, companies, to be able to compete. We haven't had them to offer. Look what's happened to a lot of them. I mean, there are 1,500 less jobs, and I could bring you the chart that shows what companies are, what their employment is compared to where it was. 3M, for example, was over 900, they're over 200. That happens all the time, or we're asked for, help us put a proposal so Columbia can get this expansion.
And
It's not just an automatic, it's
Yeah,
gonna happen
and we
here
fully,
anyway.
and we fully understand that,
Yeah.
you know, the dynamics of all of that. You
Yeah.
know, and those are real things
Yeah.
that's happening to communities.
But Mike and I get asked that question all the
Yeah.
time by our companies, and we just, you know, this would be a tool that we could help them try and compete, so I just want to make that point. So,
All the wishing and hoping is good, but let's just take worst case scenario. 2 jobs are created. 4 kids added to the burden. Okay, how much does it cost to educate 4 kids versus the abatement benefit for that company generating 2 jobs? What impact does that have on unemployment? In reality. And I guess my mind state is this: I don't want to hope and wish, let's look at the worst case scenario and protect ourselves against the worst case scenario. That is in our hands at this time. And I know we're trying to move on. We've got people on the table that are looking to come to Columbia. I'd rather slow this thing down to a snail's crawl. We cannot cover our behind. I mean, this is where I'm at. We have to cover our behind somewhere, and this is in our hands. The school board has to have a mechanism in place to hold these companies accountable. I'm a businessman. I'm already licking my chops. Okay, check it out. I got $100,000. It has to be in the assets. Okay, what I'll do is I'll go buy some equipment. I'll write it off on my taxes anyway. Okay, I'll go buy that auction. You know, there's so many ways I can play this to make this look good in the books. That's what you get accountants for. You know, is this really true cash money? Nobody's coming to you giving you $100,000 in cash. Nobody's going to do that. They're going to put it in assets. They're going to put it in property. They're going to do something like that. They're going to play with the books as best they can. That's business. I would do it. You know, so, you know, truly, what are we gonna do to protect ourselves? What are we gonna do to protect the school board? The things we need to do are to put these triggers in place. Whatever language we need to do, whatever hoops we need to jump, whatever we need to do, we need to have that language in place so that we can hold these guys accountable. Are they only reporting once a year? Are they reporting every quarter? Can we make them report every quarter? Let's say, for instance, they had 2 jobs created first quarter. They lose those jobs second quarter. We sting them that quarter, but then the third quarter they create those 2 jobs again. Okay, they get their abatement back that third quarter. You know, we hold them accountable each quarter. Can we do that? Is it once a year? I don't know. But we need to have something accountable, and it needs to be not where they screw up. It comes back to us. We make a recommendation. It goes back to city council, and then city council slaps their hand. We can avoid all that. We can set some policy right now that triggers something that happens right now. As soon as you screw up, we got a trigger in place that can happen. I think we're in position to do that. Because by then, look, he could have them 2 jobs back. I've seen it happen several times.
Can you give me kind of an example of what you're talking about?
Okay, I'm a minority contractor. And what often prime contractors will do is that they have a good faith effort. They don't have to give you contracts. They don't have to give you a job. They don't have to hire minorities, okay? But what they'll do is, they'll say we tried. We faxed X amount of people, okay? There's a federal contract that may have 5 or 10% NBEWE participation on it, okay? At this current time, I've never seen it happen, and when it tried to happen, they had a heart attack. There's nothing in place but a report. I got this contract. On the report it says, how many minority contracts you use? 0. How many minorities did you hire? 0. That's the report. It goes to the state, it goes to the city, they look, okay, they didn't do it. There's no trigger, there's no accountability, nothing. It's nothing to make them even want to stay on the...
Maybe I'm asking more for a specific example in reference to the EEZ. Are you looking for, maybe, because I'm not really wiki and I need to understand better what you're saying.
We need a police force. If you didn't have police on the corner...
No, I mean with the EEZ though. Well, okay. And what are you saying, like every quarter we ask them to put...
I don't know, what's the reporting cycle now for these companies?
Well, Pat helped me out with this. I think the assessor assesses property on the first of the year. The tax bill is due at the end of the year.
The assessment date is January 1. That's when the property is valued. The taxing entities have a time period then where the assessment for the entire county is assimilated. The taxing entities can look at that. They determine their budgetary needs and determine then what the tax levy should be set at to meet the budgetary needs within the ceiling voted by the voters. You can't have a tax levy that's has not been approved by the voters. Those tax levies, then the proposed tax levies go to the state auditor, go to the county clerk, sends it to the state auditor for certification, it comes back to the school district then lets the clerk know that they've been certified. Those tax rates then are used against the assessed value that the assessor has determined, and that's when the tax bills are created. And that process goes through October 1. October 30th, I believe now with the law change, that taxing entities can get their levies certified. So then, in a first-class county, which Boone County is, the county collector builds a tax bill November 1, we try to hit that, and then the tax bills hit the mail November 15th, and collection starts. And that's it in a nutshell. I made it sound pretty simple, but it's not quite that simple in reality. But
To my experience,
January 1 is when the assessed values are determined.
to my experience, a lot of companies pay their taxes quarterly.
Not property taxes now.
Okay.
So now, don't get confused with the tax credits, and I'm not the right one to speak about the state tax credits.
So, what I heard you saying, Anthony, is if a company meets the minimum requirements of 2 jobs, the $100,000 investment, and they get the benefits of the EEZ, and then a month later, let's say they let go of the 2 employees, what are the triggers? Is kind of what I heard you say. How are we going to hold the companies accountable to keep the employees?
How are you going to audit, or how are you going
how are we going to track that
monitor
they're,
that they're
and that's kind of what I
sustaining
heard.
the improvements?
And actually, I'm not even, I'm more on the end game of the whole system. What is the punishment or what are the penalties for not playing the game at the end? I mean, we find them guilty of not retaining these jobs. They did not create 2 jobs. What happens? And what trigger happens, and who pulls the trigger, and who dishes out the lashes? What's the system that makes that happen?
Right now, as I understand it, they would not be eligible for the tax credits in the new year.
But that wouldn't be till the following year.
Right. And it's going to have to be reassessed.
So how would you,
Well,
how would
really,
you audit or monitor?
the abatement only occurs if they expand real property. So there's a good likelihood of companies just earning state tax credits. There is no local abatement. I mean, that happens quite frequently under the program. So if they're adding an addition onto their facility, an expansion of real property, that's going to be assessed on the first of the year. We just need to make sure at some point during that year that they've maintained their jobs. We can set that date, whatever we want to do. And when they pay their tax bill at the end of the year, if they get the abatement if they've maintained the jobs, but if the jobs aren't there, then
Okay. I could hire at the beginning of the year for the first quarter. I'm in construction. I could hire for the first year, 3 months, fire them. Then I know I got to report, hire 2 more right before I have to report. When I report, I'm going to report I have 2 jobs. There's no retention requirements, is there? I didn't see any. There's no retention requirements, maybe 60 days, maybe 90 something. I mean, I can play this game. I can hire and fire right on the reporting schedule. I know you can, and you could get away with it. And if you could. And bottom line is, if I don't do it and I say screw you, there's no penalty. We have nothing in place right now other than recommend. And by the time that cycle comes back around, he can say, no, I got these 2 jobs again. You know, I mean, we got to look at the loopholes, and we got to address these, and we have that power right now. That's all I'm saying. And if we don't, and if job creation if we're not taking the job creation serious at this time, I'm wasting my time on this board, because I was told that the intention was to bring businesses here, to create jobs, to create a good business environment, and if that's not really, if this issue is something that doesn't have any weight, I'm wasting my time. I got money to make. I'll go make it. Y'all can have this board. That's where I'm at. this is a serious issue. Whether the trip is how we're gonna hold these guys accountable.
Can we find out if this has been discussed in any of the other advisory boards around the state? I don't think we can go to DED on this because their reporting requirements are what we're questioning, right? So-
Well, and I mean, I think what, partly why DED's not gonna know is what Anthony's concerned about, I think, more than, there are two incentives under this program. There's the state tax credits and there's local property tax abatement. If I understand what you're saying, you're talking about the local property tax abatement. The DED.
That's us.
Yeah, that's what we have control over.
Yes.
The state administers its tax credit program, and the state auditor, had a report in 2010 about the administration of this tax credit program at DED that was critical of some things that they do, including accountability provisions. And I hope that the DED is going to improve those accountability provisions and implement some of the recommendations that the auditors made. But those recommendations, as far as I can tell, and I've read the report carefully, I've got copies if anyone wants them, don't have any bearing on what locals do. It's not an audit of local EEZ board practices. It's not an audit of the costs and gains at the local level, except to the extent that the benefits from the program overall were overstated by the DED in their reports to the General Assembly. And DED says that's because we made typo errors that affected things by a factor of, a power of 10. I mean, you go from 87 million to 870 million, it makes your numbers look different. CFO knows that. That's a very fat finger.
I think Anthony's got a good point. I don't know, is it this committee policy to do that, or, I mean, we can put some things in place. I mean, I agree. I mean, yeah, you're right, you can game the system. How many stopgaps, or what can we put in place to try to prevent that?
As many
which
as
is
we
good.
can
Yeah, so I was gonna say, so,
Yeah, I certainly understand what you're saying,
Yeah,
but it's going to require some diligence on somebody's part.
I
you
think
put that on,
we can make it more complicated.
When you put that on the city or on, somebody to, because really what you're talking about is some kind of auditing
right.
or
I
a
think
process to make sure that they're doing what they said to do. And
An oversight function.
an oversight function.
Yeah.
And who would do that?
That's what I don't know. I mean, I don't know who
Well,
has the authority.
each zone has a local administrator. It has not been determined whether it would be, who it would be here, what organization. But yeah, we completely agree. It's for, full-time benefited positions that you hire and maintain.
Right, continuing. Yeah,
And
right.
so it's,
And we could word it such,
Language.
we could put some language in that's pretty strict.
That has to be continuous and.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't.
That if whoever
Position.
does the auditing or the follow-up would have, and then
Right.
we would have some oversight there annually, but would have the ability.
We understand business is business. You can't just keep somebody on you not making money. I'm not saying that. But we can definitely make some minimums, 90 days at least, 6 months. I mean, all that's in our hands. This is what I'm saying. And this is nothing that we just, what I was hearing in the dialogue before is, yeah, this is in place, this we'll recommend, this is what's supposed to happen. I don't want to hear supposed to's, hopes, and wishes. Let's line it up, nail it down in our control, on our scope, and hold them accountable in every aspect that we can. And if it hasn't been done, let's do it and apologize later. I guess is my position. Columbia's great on being innovators. Let's be innovators on this. Hey, that president. Either way is a good way.
And Bernie, you're qualified to see if we can raise that minimum requirement of jobs for the tax abatement.
yes.
Okay.
So we're saying,
Is
I'm
there-
sorry, I missed something, so like 2 to 10, is that what, something like that?
I was thinking maybe 2 to 15, possibly. I think that's what, let me go ahead and pass this out. This is something that I Googled. because the whole concept is to create jobs, you know.
Right, that's what we want.
So this sort of looks like we're probably trying to do that.
I love the language as far as maintaining 15 or more jobs with an average of 35 hours per week. You know, to me, that's an accountability piece that I'm hearing that we say we want to.
See, I pointed this out to them because if you look at this, it says to get state tax credits, all you have to do is create 2 jobs and invest 100, but they're not doing property tax abatement until you create the 15.
Right.
So the state's not going to give them tax credits for 2 jobs and 100,000 because the locals aren't giving them the abatement. So
I don't know if that's right. I don't know if that's right because whatever the local ordinance sets up what the local abatement requirement is. It has to make the business eligible for 50% abatement for a minimum of 10 years under the statute. It does, as I have looked at the statute, I just looked at it now, it says something, let me just read it. And it's something about other terms and conditions and requirements of the local, whatever the local government sets up. There's some other terms and conditions language within the statute. What the notice of intent says is, and a certification by the governing authority, the above named facility will receive a local incentive of 10 years of 50% tax abatement or X years of X abatement as set forth in the local governing resolution or ordinance. And so if the local governing resolution or ordinance sets it up as Republic looks like they have to do 15 or more jobs with an average of 35 hours per week, they're going to get the abatement if they meet the local requirement.
Yeah.
And I don't,
and I think my point was, though, I understand what you're saying,
yeah.
but they're promoting it as if the state is going to give them tax credits if they just create the 2. I think if we're going to raise ours up and be more restrictive, that the state is going to raise theirs up. For example, if you're saying 10 or 15 jobs, then in this case, this would not be accurate. We would have to say, we'd have to create 15 jobs and X amount of investment to get state credits also, state benefits.
But why do you think that?
So it's a correlation.
No, but if you look at this, the first part says state tax credits. The minimum is 2 jobs, $100,000. Then underneath it says property abatement, which is from us. Its requirements is this.
Yeah.
See, so you can get the tax credits with 2 jobs, but if you want the abatement, then these are additional requirements. That's how I'm reading this. If you look right underneath where it says primary development available, it's got 2 subheadings before it gets into the qualifying companies.
And I mean, the reason I asked why do you think that is because the state can give tax credits in circumstances when there is no local abatement. Because the company is in the zone, and the state has made a decision that if a city has a zone, it has to make eligible businesses get 10 years of 50% property tax abatement on the local conditions, whatever those are. And if the zone is established and a business invests and makes 2 jobs, the state policy is we're going to give tax credits, regardless of what actually happens on the ground in the local community for that business. And it sort of seems like there's room to do what it looks like Republic has tried to do. And I don't know anybody in Republic, Missouri, and I don't know what this looks like. I'm trying to get to their website. It's frozen my computer, so that's maybe a red flag.
Let me ask Mike if you your interpretation too from what we heard from DED.
Well, the question has been posed a little differently at this point. What we were told was whatever our minimum is what the state minimum would be. But the point has been made that if there's no abatement being requested with the state minimum, that's a question we need to follow up on. I do know that if we establish a minimum, so if a company comes in and proposes 2 jobs and a building abatement based on some value, and we've established a 10 minimum, then nobody's going to get that program. If we establish the 10 minimum, they create 10 jobs, then there's no problem. The question becomes, though, where the state minimum is 2 jobs, 100,000, we establish a higher level, then those companies that don't meet that higher level would qualify for the state, but they won't qualify because of our higher minimum.
Because they didn't achieve our value.
Right.
You're saying they would.
So based on what Carol told us, if we establish a higher level, then that becomes the minimum for the state. I mean, that's the
It
interpretation.
does require that. I'm not going.
So in other words, if we deny a benefit to a company because of our minimum, the state would do the same thing.
For our community, and not
Yeah, just for
statewide.
here. Yeah, this would only be this zone. It wouldn't have any ramification of the other.
Okay.
But as far as what Republic did, it doesn't read that way.
Right.
So
You
it's-
get the
so it's
state
something-
credit,
And you still get the state, but not the
and we get the abatement.
the local tax base.
Yeah, so in other words, if there's no tax abatement being requested, even though we have a, let me restate that. If we had a 10-person minimum for a tax abatement, a company comes in, they're not asking for an abatement, they didn't make a physical improvement to real estate, would they qualify with 2 jobs? That's a question I don't know, okay? That's the distinction. If the minimum is 10 jobs for our tax abatement, and there is a tax abatement involved in the development, then the 10 jobs will be the same for the state.
That's not what it.
To get the state tax credit, it would be 10 jobs. That's what, okay.
I'm just telling you what the
Yeah.
program director told
If we
us.
raise ours, then it raises.
The state is gonna raise its.
Yeah.
Requirement. So, okay.
And then what that would effectively say is that some smaller companies will be excluded from coming to our community.
The rate is too high to make the minimum too high.
Yeah, because if you're below 10 jobs,
Right.
You're not gonna get abated.
you're not gonna get abated.
Right.
But
And
you
you're
can
not
still
gonna
come
get
to
it.
our community, and I hope that you would.
Yeah, right.
That's a whole.
If the intent,
Right.
if we're staying true to our intent,
So, create job creation.
if we, yeah, I mean,
And
and
that's
if
what we
we're-
ought to focus on.
Yeah, if it's job creation, 2 at a time is wonderful, but
When I talk to the governor, that's not the kind of job he's looking for. He's looking for, creating more than 2 at a time, I'm assuming. Because I can start a web business and have 2 people. You know what I mean? I mean, I thought we were looking at manufacturing, we're looking at, those kind of jobs that we're trying to hit people that are unskilled or semi-skilled or underemployed. 2 jobs is, that's not the kind of companies that are gonna hire 2 people to do it.
So we'll get clarification on that from EED and probably,
I'd like to kind of just make sure we clarify what we're asking him to do. Maybe we could get a motion. I've written down some things, but
So I
I
would,
know you have too.
yeah, I would make, on the subject of what we can do, I would make a motion that we solicit the advice of the county councilor and the city councilor as to whether the EEZ program permits a local municipality to increase the minimum requirements to obtain the local tax abatement.
I second that motion.
Are you taking the notes today?
yeah.
And fine.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Is there anything, go ahead.
Yes, for clarification, you've asked me to solicit the city and the county, also DED, on their interpretation of this, or since they're the program, or?
I'm not asking for DED's interpretation right now.
I would presume that they'll probably somebody, I would presume the city or somebody will contact, get a clarification, because that's going to be, but
Yeah,
they can do that.
From my perspective, DED is not necessarily on our side on this thing. You know, they have had a history of ignoring local consequences to their economic development programs. And that's what we're trying to focus on. And I think we're better served to get the guidance from our local, you know, the lawyers that are paid from our local tax revenues on that subject. And I assume that they will reach out to DED. I would be
There may even
surprised.
be a state regulation
Yeah.
file that covers
Yeah,
this.
right, I was going to say, so it may be, I think it's a good suggestion. I think we all voted for it. I think it's a good suggestion, so.
They have our interest. Yeah.
Is, yeah, I've heard just a few other things. Is there any other motions we want Bernie to look into?
So back to the fundamental question, I don't know if we're going to actually, on the abatement, I think we've all sounded like, and again, I apologize for being late, we are talking about leaving it at the minimum of 50%, is that correct? Do we have that decided then, is that pretty well? Okay, okay, good.
I would move that we leave it at
Yeah,
50%.
I agree, I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The other thing I heard a lot of discussion around was the issue of auditing or accountability for the process. And
I move we create a subcommittee to generate the language necessary to hold qualifying companies accountable to the minimum standards of the EEZ.
That we established, right?
discussion on that? Bill? I would ask, I would maybe add to that beyond this, we either have Bernie, maybe have Bernie as part of that committee, only from the perspective of what's realistic. I don't know. I don't know what reality is and how you could go about, how we could set up somebody to audit or and he might be more familiar with that from a city government perspective.
I'm trying to think how that was done under the Chapter 100 process, because that policy was written to address some of those concerns, and I don't recall how that language came about. Do you?
How the policy came about?
Right,
Yeah.
that talked to this issue.
Basically, an incentive subcommittee meeting with commissioners on a fairly regular basis and coming up with a policy that they agreed upon. And that Chapter 100, it was it's a little bit different in that it's project by project.
Right.
Once you get a project, you have a committee established made up of the taxing districts that have to
Right.
get all the information on job creation, what have you, and then pass it to send it on to the county commission. So
I just can't remember how it got to what you're talking about, Anthony, that some
Yeah.
language was put in there as a protection, and I don't know what
Yeah.
that
Well, would that be a
process was.
good thing to first look at? The subcommittee can look at that language and see if we can modify it.
yeah.
So, I mean,
That just might be a good starting point.
and that's why I think it'd be good if we could ask Bernie to do that and let him be part of that committee so he can kind of do some legwork on it.
So we have a motion, any other discussion on it? Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? So who do we want on this little subcommittee?
I nominate Mr. Jim Wade.
I thought you were volunteering.
I got enough dogs in this fight.
I'm sure he has another meeting you'd like to go to.
No, I don't mind doing that. That's, like I said, helps answer a question
So
that I
is
had.
it a one-man committee?
Well, I think it's nice to have Patty.
Yeah.
She'll know the detail. I mean, you're going to know a little
She
more
knows
of the
the
process
details.
than we do.
process.
Yeah, you two could work on it.
Or I make them up as I go along.
That's fine. We believe you, so that's fine.
And then Bernie,
And then Bernie.
And that'd be good.
anyone else want to be involved?
Do I get a salary increase for doing this?
100%.
Double zero.
100% times your current salary.
From a time perspective, maybe you do it via conference call or something. These are ways to do it,
I don't think it's realistic to think we'll have this done by the next meeting though, because I think this will take whatever the next meeting is, because this is gonna take some
Yeah, it's
time.
gonna take some. And we can start with the TIF wording, maybe.
I don't know about tip wording. You said
Or
tip.
was it
Oh, chapter 100.
Chapter 100.
Yeah, and there, I just threw
Chapter
that, there may be some other, taxing incentive programs that we can look at that would give us a foundation. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, chapter 100 is probably
The closest.
closest and pretty comprehensive.
So I guess just to formalize, I would nominate Jim Witt and Pat Linsmeyer to be the members of the subcommittee and Bernie Andrews to be the staff liaison to the subcommittee. And I'd move that they accept the nomination too.
All in favor?
All right.
I abstain.
Jim didn't vote, so.
Who seconded that?
Yeah, well, I thought, I'm sorry. Is there anything else after this long?
On the proposal that I brought forward, the proposed policy recommendation, to hold now that we've agreed on 50%, to hold that at the improvement as it occurs and not go beyond that. And you weren't here for that discussion. Did I not give you that?
I'm sorry.
We need a motion on that. I will get the policy recommendation be approved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Can you fasten that?
Okay. So any other discussion?
I guess the only other thing I would add on abatements before we move on is, just so you all know, before this meeting, I was trying to get my mind around what the magnitude of the abatement has been for other communities. And it's a difficult number to derive because the DED doesn't report it. What I found through a little bit of research was annual activity reports from Springfield for the 2005 year, which was the first year, 2005 to 2006, 2006 to 2007, 2007 to 2008. And I reached out to Carol Shoemaker this afternoon to say, I would like to look at the more current Springfield ones as well. And I also asked her for Sedalia and Moberly, because Moberly is nearby us, and they have taken a more restrictive view of eligible businesses than a lot of the other zones. And so I'd like to see what their reports look like. And then Sedalia and Springfield are both kind of larger, well-established. They've had zones since the 2005-2006 timeframe. So they're going to be more information. And my hope is that by the time we have our next meeting, I'll be able to report both some estimate of what the local abatement is, and it will be at best an estimate because I'm just going to use the information that gets reported is and I'm looking at Springfield's first report. The information that gets reported is true value in money of the property in the enhanced enterprise zone, which is totally or partially exempt from ad valorem taxes during the reporting period, as reported by the county assessors. So from that number, and some of this is going to be totally a useless exercise.
No, I think you should be a subcommittee to do this.
To take that number, and in order to get to what the value is, you have to apply this is the assessed value as reported by the county assessors. That's the tax value, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to reduce it by the
Right,
32%.
no,
So that's the tax value. Multiply it by, say, our tax.
Divided by 100, multiplied times the tax rate.
Right.
That'll give you the tax.
That'll give you the tax amount. And so this is the amount that is totally or partially exempt. And it's not, so everything within this is getting at least 50%.
When you say totally exempt, you're talking about they actually had 100%?
Some do. Sedalia does have 100% abatement.
Oh, is that right?
They do.
I don't know.
And so some, different communities do it differently. And so what I would want, sort of my idea about this is to use a 50% number, so that, and also these reports also tend to list the existing businesses that expanded and then the new businesses that came. This has helped me kind of understand, try and develop an understanding of what businesses are actually being attractive or growing, and so that when we look at the codes, the eligible business codes, it'll help guide our discussion and our decision-making about, okay, well, here's actually the businesses that have grown, and here's actually the businesses that have come to EEZs that are in different communities, so that we start from a better platform of knowledge.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense, because I think in Columbia we're in a lot different place than maybe a town like Sedalia.
Absolutely.
Who maybe is losing people, leaving the community, there's no jobs, there's a lot of hardship maybe, and I don't know Sedalia that well, but you might go all out to attract business. We were probably in a very different place.
But I just want, I hope that this will help me at least understand better what's worked, in these other zones, and what has happened there. So that, there are lots of reasons why what has happened in Springfield and Sedalia and Moberly might not happen in Columbia. But I'd like for this board to know what has happened in those places, so that we can advise council appropriately.
The challenge will be to be able to sift through that and make it applicable to us. That will be the challenge, and I don't know how you get to that point, but I think you're onto something there.
What do you mean?
Well, as you said, today is a much different place. They're all starting from a much different place than where we're starting, so it's going to be very difficult to assimilate all that information and make it applicable to what we're talking about. But I think it can be done.
Well, and I don't know that it will be necessarily, applicable. And I hate to think that I'm doing this for nothing, but
well, no one can do it.
You're right, exactly. Right. And it may be that there's a business within the Springfield zone that grew that looks similar in some respects to an existing business in Columbia, and that would be useful to know. That this business that, say it's a lumber yard, decided to take advantage of the EEZ and grew by 50% or whatever it was, and maybe our lumber yard could do the same thing, maybe not. Well, they're required by state statute, and for Springfield at least, the person completing the form is Mike McPherson. And the primary administrator of the EEZ is Mary Smith, who's the Economic Development Director for the city. I was pleased to see that the EEZ Advisory Board members didn't appear.
Is there a job summary in there?
There are just numbers, job numbers.
Just job numbers. not quantities.
You know, I mean, with Springfield ones, it says T-Mobile, 650 new jobs. Select Brands, 30 new jobs. Prime Source Building, 41. And then, existing businesses that grew, Flowers Bakery grew by 10 jobs. It's interesting. And one of these Springfield ones, the other Missouri-based chocolate company, Askenassi Chocolate or something, is getting benefits from the EEZ. And Patrick Chocolate, which makes chocolate in Columbia, is within the boundaries of the current proposed north zone, which is just interesting to think about.
Any other discussion? We have just a half hour time left, and we certainly will open up. We're trying to have 20 minutes of public comment, so we really have about 10 minutes of other business discussing. I guess I'm open. We wanted to move on to the NAICS codes. We were going to try to do some work on that. Maybe it would be more fruitful to talk about what do we want to try to accomplish in looking at NAICS codes for the next meeting. I'm certainly open to how you want to proceed as a committee. If you recall, last time we were going to look at, I think it was a 3-digit NAICS codes as a committee and come back with any concerns or suggestions. And I know Jeremy, you've also sent out some comments. Maybe you want to clarify some of your comments.
Sure. I mean, and I think, given the time constraints, we'd be better off having a kind of a robust discussion of the codes like we had with the abatement at this meeting, at a next meeting. But when I was going through the codes, I sent this email to the group this afternoon. I was struggling with reconciling what I was doing with the codes with what I was thinking about the maps. Because to me, the map is the area in which we're trying to attract these businesses. And there are some parts of the map that would trouble me more with certain businesses than other parts of the map. And it's, you know, and what came most to my mind was with the current boundaries of the southern zone extend out to Providence Road. And Providence got a lot of traffic on it already right now. It's got a high school that's on it, where there are students who are going to be driving, young people in cars. And it gives me pause to make heavy manufacturing with all the attendant infrastructure concerns that eligible for tax incentives right across the street from them. Bernie helpfully pointed out that there are other codes that are, you know, that land is currently zoned for office, and there are other office-based codes within our list. But you know, I don't know that we can break down our zone by block group in terms of the eligible businesses, and I don't know that we want to. That would be, it seems like a big task, a big job, and so
I thought it was a very valid concern. And again, I would hope we have, you know, some zoning, but you're right, you want to have a heavy industrial go right across the street from Rockridge High School. Now, hopefully, the company would look at that whole infrastructure and the traffic and realize that you can't bring semis in, but that's the kind of a chance that, you know, kind of like what Andy was saying, it's kind of hoping. So I thought it was a good question that you had. I don't know if we can do different zones and different codes and stuff, I don't know.
Well, and what I tried to explain in the email response to Jeremy was, I mean, we are trying to have sites for manufacturing, sites for the office projects like T-Mobile, and you also have to look at your existing buildings in terms of industrial and office. And so like in this zone, that site we're talking about across from Rockridge is zoned office. We would never propose that for manufacturing, and I don't think that would ever get through any kind of screening process. But, for example, this zone over here has more industrial sites and industrial buildings. This is Lamone Industrial Park. So depending on what the project is, if we're trying to get them in this zone, we need to have office building and office sites for those kind of companies like back office, some of the professional technical services. And we need to have sites for industrial, which would be like the Lamone Industrial, which is getting fairly close to full, or out here at the Route Z where we've got industrial parks down here, we have industrial buildings. So what we're trying to do is have a, to be able to attract a variety of different projects, not only the manufacturing, but the call center, the T-Mobile type, the call center, the back office, ones that are looking for office space as opposed to building, ones that are looking for industrial space. So this zone like it is kind of gives us that mix. Not that you would ever put a manufacturer.
But Bernie, to
Sure.
alleviate, because he's got a valid concern. It might help if we had an overlay of the planning and zoning, or the zoning, because that's going to probably overlay some of your concerns. But I thought it was a valid, So that's what we're saying. Yeah, we understand that the whole zone we have to have different.
Sure.
But I think as a committee, we're saying, is there other protections besides just the EE zone?
Yeah. And you do have a zoning map.
Yeah, right.
No, Bernie, you did, to the previous committee, you did a presentation that showed all the different areas. I know it was probably a bigger map back at that point in time. I wonder if it would be a bad idea to go back and that PowerPoint, it's in here, right?
It's in your book,
Okay.
it's in your binder, yeah.
Might not be a bad idea to go through that with us again.
Mr. Chairman, I think, don't we have a third option here where, and I almost shudder to suggest this because it's more of an administrative challenge for me when you get down to the back end of this, but you can have more than one zone, and you can have different industry codes for the zones. I mean,
Right,
if that's a valid concern here, where you don't want to ever think about heavy manufacturing in the school area, you do have an option of creating 2 zones out of that one and using different codes. And just to throw that out as something to think about.
And it would depend on what the data, eligibility data look like, because, and then I think that's a bigger discussion we need to have on the data.
Does it take all of those census blocks to meet the minimum criteria of whatever those are?
Of that zone.
Of that zone?
I think so.
Does it?
Yeah.
Because when we tried to take out the Providence Road census block group, we had to grow. And I think the reason for that is when you look at where the data are on this block group, on this zone, the one that's exclusively in the county has very low poverty and very low unemployment. That's where Old Hawthorne is. That's where there's some, highly employed but generally working class folks who live out in that, where you see those streets. And so the poverty numbers there are like 30% in that area. And in order to get it back up above 60, the zone has to grow west. One thing that I wondered about, in sort of thinking this through, is whether we could run a map that took out that zone. And I know that there are some desirable sites out there by Central Area and Route Z, but there's a problem with the data supporting that portion, of the zone. And so I wonder what would happen if we shrank it down to kept Discovery Ridge, kept Lamone, and just see, I don't know if it would still be eligible or not, given what the data show, but I would be interested in seeing.
Is that 2 census tracts, Bernie? that right now, what was it?
This one?
Yes.
This is actually 4.
4, okay.
This is 1 right here, 2,
Okay.
3 right here, and then the 4th one starts here and goes that way. So it's actually 4 census block roads, yeah. And it's,
How accurate is the street map underneath that?
It's not that detailed. It's accurate, but there are some streets that aren't shown.
and also, just so you know, that these are the state-produced maps. These boundaries you see here are the city limits as of 2000, not the 2010. It's the way they produce those maps. So actually, the city limit boundaries have changed.
So to qualify, we're discussing certain NAICS codes going to certain census block groups is one challenge. And then taking out Hawthorne, is that what you said? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and this, I mean, the problem, what I was struggling with was looking at the code separate from the map. And my thinking about the map influenced my thinking about the eligible businesses. And then I got to looking at the map, and then, you know, so, and wondering if we could make the map smaller. And I know that it was a problem to shrink it over that way. And that's what led to the unified zone, which has other concerns. So that's not an answer, but that's kind of where I was coming from. Thank you.
Now, there were the 2 zones that were proposed, the north one and this one. You can have different codes in different zones, but
Not by census.
not by census block.
Oh, different zones we can have. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Right.
We can make the north, you know, east
Yeah.
pretty well, but then you're gonna have the,
Yeah, but you can't say you can only allow certain codes in this
Okay.
census block group, but not this one. You have to
Right.
submit them
By
by
zones.
zone.
Okay.
Just for the sake of time here, I want to kind of bring us back to a couple things we got to get done before we open it up. One is a next meeting. Now we have a subcommittee, and they may not have time to get done what they need to get done, but what does everybody's calendar look like for next week? Next week's pretty rough for me. I think some of us are going out of town, and
I'll be on next week.
you're out of town next week.
Wednesday also.
I am not available Wednesday, I don't think.
Any, 3 weeks out on Wednesday or not? We're not talking about Wednesdays?
We can in the future. I know. Now, are you out all next week, Randy?
No, I'm here next week, but I'm the week of the 25th.
Okay.
Really, the only time I could do it next week if it was an afternoon meeting like this would be Monday, and it's gonna be a pinch. But that's the only day I could.
And I'm out Monday.
You're out
town
Monday.
first.
You're out of town.
Yeah,
Okay.
first.
Tuesdays are good days for me. I got a board meeting the 3rd Tuesday of every month right at this time.
Any opportunity for Tuesday morning?
After the 29th.
I know it's always a problem for you.
Are you
I'll
talking
put
about
out,
the 19th?
yeah, I can sacrifice one more time.
Are you talking about the 19th, or are you talking about any Tuesday?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a 9 o'clock appointment with a sort of security investigator, so.
Okay.
Would it kill us to push this out, but after 2 weeks, will everybody be back on schedule? We got subcommittee work anyway, I mean,
Trying to do-
probably.
Just so we get the dates we're talking about here. You're talking about the week of June 25th?
Or are you talking about the week?
I mean, yeah, when everybody's
July 2nd.
schedule kind of starts clearing back
So
up.
we have the 4th of July on a Wednesday, so we probably need to do it on Monday, the 2nd of July, because some people may want to get out of town on Tuesday, so
That would be fine.
I think I could do it then too.
Yeah.
Was it July?
On what day?
July 2nd, which is a Monday.
Yeah, that's good for me.
What time? 5:30, 7:30, or morning? Did you guys pick a time?
We do not, afternoon is probably better than morning that day for me.
I would probably need to be out of here no later than Is there any chance we could go from 5 to 7?
I'm good with that.
I might be a little late, but that'd be okay.
We gotta do it.
I know I have to get out of here by 7. So can we shoot for
Monday,
July
July
2nd, 5 to 7?
5 to 7.
Where can we go? So we don't.
Yeah, how do we find out where the meetings are going?
I think you're right.
We did.
We have to check room availability, and our first choice is always 1A or 1B over at the City Hall, so we'll check that and see if there's a room available, and then if not, we'll take up an alternative location.
council meeting.
There is, and I don't know if
Okay.
there's any prior
Well,
subcommittees
Can we
meeting.
look at here then again, or if, why don't you let us know, we'll work on it.
We'll pick
Okay.
that immediately.
Okay, good, yeah.
I'd like to make one motion before we close out, and this will probably be prepped for the next meeting. Is everybody familiar with the Office of Social and Economic Data Analysis? Have you heard of that organization? I move that we reach out and give an invitation for somebody from that group to come and talk to us next meeting. I think they can probably help us with a third-party data entity, have no irons in this fire, to come in and help us understand most accurate data, kind of take some of the pressure off of Mr. Andrews. These people do this stuff every day. I think them coming in, sharing their thoughts on the data that we have and how to suggest how we can maybe update our data to make better decisions. I think an invitation to them. It may fly, it may not, I don't know if they're available, but I move that we invite them to the next meeting.
That's second day.
All in favor, or discussion, I'm sorry. Can you clarify a little bit better for me, just what value they would add?
They eat and breathe social and economic statistical data. That's all they do.
So, I mean, what I would hope is that they'd be able to help us grapple with the changes that have been made with the demographic data, what data we're using, what the data show, what the updated data, what data are available, you know, and ideally, I mean, I don't know what Anthony was thinking, but ideally, to me, they would be able to say, here's the new, you know, here's what the new poverty data looks like. I mean, that would be, to me, ideal. It's just, I know DDD isn't going to use it, but I think we should know what it is.
And the other reason I ask is, and that's fine, that, you know, just to invite them to the meeting, I think we ought to be really clear
Well,
what we would ask them to
my
come
true
with.
intent really is to employ their services. It will be no cost to us. And honestly, that's where I was gonna go with it, but, you know, I would kind of want them to come in, maybe do a presentation, because I think our next task needs to be the next codes, and that's gonna roll right into our map situation.
The reason I ask that is just so they're prepared to come talk to us about what we want versus just show up.
Right, right. And with this 2 weeks kind of gap, I think we can give us time to get them here and get any questions. We can have email traffic about questions or what you want them to answer or whatever.
Okay, so you would specifically ask them to come to speak to us about economic data.
New census data, poverty data. They could probably better explain the confidence interval issue that's come up with the public.
Okay. Do you want them to speak to these specific zones?
I would say we show them our maps and yeah.
Okay.
And they could maybe on the follow-up come back with some reports. But 2 weeks, we may be able to give them the data that we've got, and they may even come with some new information.
Who would contact them and talk to them?
I will get with somebody and get a contact.
So you would follow up with this then?
I can.
Okay, so that would be part of your motion.
Whatever. Get her done. Excellent. I'm throwing it out there.
Good share work.
You want to restate your motion?
I move that I get in touch with social and economic data analysis for the next meeting to discuss proposed EEZ zones, poverty information, and confidence interval information compared from 2000 to 2010.
Okay. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Any other final discussion? And maybe we give it 15 minutes to a half hour, something like that, just so we have some kind of time frame. And then, so we do want to open up the public comment, and what I would ask, I know there's a lot of people that always want to talk, to give as many people a chance to talk as possible. If you can keep it to 2 to 3 minutes, appreciate it. So with that, we'll open it up.
Hi, I think you probably all know my name. But
Oh, yeah.
Lynn Green. Okay, I've got a little handout for you, and it is about data, and I really appreciate your dealing with data tonight. So this handout is a little bit harsh, but I appreciate you looking for data. As far as data, I question whether you have proper poverty and unemployment data that proves that Columbia neighborhoods should be in an EEZ or blight zone. And what about data that proves EEZs are cost effective at providing jobs? And Anthony, you were really talking about that. I think we really need to have proof that good jobs are effectively created by EEZs. And but here's a big question. You're completely lacking in data that shows that Columbians themselves are willing to cut Columbia's public tax base, which supports our city services and infrastructure, and to give tax cuts to private corporations. There's also no data showing that Columbians are willing to call their own neighborhoods falsely but legally blighted so that private businesses can qualify for tax breaks within EEZs. So I don't think you have any data on that, except for lots of community protests so far. Okay, and what about data that shows that EEZs have worked well in other Missouri cities? You've been addressing that. I really appreciate that, so we'll see how that turns out. On the other hand, we do have data that shows disastrous effects of corporate tax abatements and other financial perks in other cities. There are many examples of failed programs that were in the book that we gave you by Greg Leroy, the Great American Jobs Scam, and they're on his website, goodjobsfirst.org, and I'll give you a paper that's got that website on it. Okay, we do have data of disastrous financial giveaways to corporations here in Missouri, like the Mamtech failure in Moberly, state line hopping by corporations in Kansas City, and Independence. They are paying $3 to $4 million per year out of their general public funds to keep a private shopping center afloat. And we don't want to get into that kind of situation at all. I'm sure none of us want that. Okay, finally, and this is very important. We're looking at the Columbia City Ordinance that establishes this board and its duties. And we talked about that before, and Jeremy last time was clarifying some of that. But here's what the language says to establish this board in the ordinance. It says the Enhanced Enterprise Zone Board's responsibilities include advising the City Council on the designation of the Enhanced Enterprise Zone. And so my reading of this is that in addition to what Reddy says about choosing boundaries for EEZs, you do also have a directive, according to the wording of the city ordinance, to advise the City Council on EEZs in general. Therefore, I think it is your duty by ordinance to determine the viability of EEZs. In other words, are they really going to be beneficial for this city or not? And if you don't have adequate data, I think you can and should actually advise the City Council that EEZs are not proven viable for Columbia and therefore should be dropped. I think you have in the ordinance that that directive to consider this question. And this handout I'm going to give you, I have the language of the ordinance at the bottom. So I hope you all will consider that. And thank you for letting me talk to you a little bit.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
John. You know me, I'm John Clark. The first thing I want to do is follow up on some stuff with Jeremy. As attorneys, I would ask you to be sure, and maybe Jeremy's people can help Bernie, send written questions to the city councilor and the county councilor outlining specifically, not verbal, written questions and ask for written responses. The business about is complicated enough, and I think there are kind of more of these things than just one. But getting it asked in writing is really going to help them do their job, and then getting it back is going to be extremely valuable, as opposed to somebody coming back and trying to just explain it. One of the things you should ask is, if you either have one zone or multiple zones, can you amend not the zone boundaries, but the NACs, the clusters for one, so that if you start out and you think that, or do you have to start all over again? That would be another question to add to the list. Secondly, of course, I really appreciate Tony's and Jeremy's really force on this, the local control. I think, in fact, where these things may have worked somewhat well around the country, it's actually because of the local things. And so getting into that, I asked Mr. Leroy when he talked to us on this thing, and actually his answer referred to a term called community benefit agreements. Now actually, where they do these are actually contracts, and it's not with cities, it's between companies and a variety of local not-for-profits and community organizations. But I think in Leroy's book on his website, looking into the content of some of those kind of agreements would be an excellent place to look for the additional local requirements that would help make EEZs effective for local goals. I do know I heard one that on some of the, maybe it was in the TIFs, the issue about the abatements. Well, I think some of these things just basically say, well, the people pay the money in, and then out of reimbursement, but use a reimbursement model that is after the fact, after the certifications and so forth. That might really simplify the whole kind of thing, and I think there are already models that are done with some of these kind of things. It's not like they don't just get assessed and charged. They get it, and then after they've certified to the state and also to the city, they get a check back, kind of stuff. To address Mr. Morrow's question, I'm not quite sure that there's a linkage here. A bunch of us did a major study 10 years ago about public infrastructure costs. Well, by now that's $35,000 a house. 40% of that is schools. So if you got 50 jobs, 50 families, a certain number of new homes, if you're taking the 50 times the 35, that's $1,750,000. This is that impact of, you got more jobs and actually it does all this stuff. Well, suppose you say that's 40% of that is the schools, that's $700,000. Then you say, well, new development should only pay half of that. That's $350,000. And the schools would need that pretty much in the first 2 or 3 years because it's about building facilities. My question then is, what kind of investment in real property or personal property would yield that kind of money? It's not just part of a small tax base. They need that kind of money up front to kind of keep up with the physical process of the school system. And I have no idea, I haven't carried it out that far, but that's big money, and I think it's one of the main reasons the school district is somewhat behind. The last couple things are, if you look at page 13 of the EEZ application, it's the one that says define the business cluster focused of this enhanced enterprise zone. As you're getting in the basics, that term business cluster is a term of art, and it's based on this kind of notion that if you think about it carefully and you focus and you're seeking this complex, in fact, and Mike knows this very well because he's worked with this, but the EEZ board in the past hasn't gotten deeply into this. I would suggest one of the groups that you want to have come and talk to you is people who are really experienced in that, so you can actually target. And the idea is, if you're going to do these kind of things, you certainly don't want a shotgun, but you can carefully kind of target for all of them or for some of them, so you get this cluster effect, which there's apparently a lot of evidence says really is how you get a big benefit in terms of job increases and this kind of stuff. I would really encourage you to look in detail at that. And that's about it for tonight.
Hey, this is one, I didn't know there was one of the first.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
There you are.
Catherine Park, a very brief specific follow-up question on the creation of the subcommittee to develop accountability standards and auditing protocols. Mr. Witt, Ms. Lansmeyer, and staff liaison, Mr. Andrews, and then Mr. Root looking into tax abatements in Springfield, Sedalia, and Moberly. Would a connection between those two be that the information regarding tax abatements and the effects in Springfield, Moberly, and Sedalia include the accountability and auditing standards so you could follow longitudinally the unfolding commitment? Not just the numbers and the dollars, but the unfolding commitment, the regularity, the consistency of that. Thank you.
Okay. Just one more person.
Just 1 minute, thank you. My name's Ken Green. I would like to urge all of us, board members, all other people who are following this EEZ issue to be very, and I'm picking up a little on what Linda said, about data and statistics. I think it's very important that we not simply, when I hear numbers, this business increased by 30 workers. This business increased by 41. These figures are meaningless to me unless they are accompanied by other facts. You know, are these outside workers? Are these inside workers? Who are the workers? Are these technicians? Are these laborers, etc.? We need to have a broader meaning that allows us to understand what these statistics mean. And statistics do lie, so let's help them to tell the truth. Thank you.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Second.
So moved.
Jobs for yeah, I meant
Maybe I'm wrong. Property, a bit more people and more jobs. That's going to help. What is their
well, I can